and has worked there since 2013. Initially, but he thought that initially thought at the Renmin University of China in Beijing, and now teaches at the School of Marxism, Dalian University of Technology. So a warm welcome, Comrade Roland. I hope the situation there where you're based at the moment, where there's no affecting much, but I'm pleased that you're here. I know that you have prepared your presentation, a video recorded presentation, just in case, the technological problems will arise there, but we're happy to have you here. Welcome. The floor is yours.
Oh, thank you very, very much, comrades. Can you hear me fine? Okay. Yes, I'm going to focus on a very specific topic on Xinjiang. I don't think I need to say why, but I'm going to begin with a few slides. So if we can have the slides up, that'd be good. Is Dennis there?
Dennis, can we upload the thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm calling this a geography lesson. Now that China has stepped onto the center of the world stage, more and more people do know about its regions, but I think it might be worth looking at a few maps. So if we can go to the first map just briefly. Now, this is a Chinese map, of course, but we'll stay with it for a moment. You can see the red dotted line running from the northeast to the southwest. Now, this is known as the Huanyong Line. It was identified 80 years ago by a scholar called Huanyong, a geographer, and he studied the history of China up until in 1930s, and he identified a distinct difference on the southeast of this line and the northwest. Can we go to the next slide, please? Notably, historically, 94% of China's population has lived southeast of the line, and only 6% of the population to the northwest. Now, there are other differences as well, because the population densities are in the cradle of Chinese civilization as well. It's also more fertile, and the major rivers are especially there, the Yellow River and the Yangtze River, or the Long River as they call it in China. The other side where the 6% live is mostly mountainous, also some semi-arid and arid areas, but extremely rich in resources. And so the historical problem in China has been to link the two areas with the resources to the population centers. And the policy is known as breaking the Huanyong Line and integrating the two. Now, in that area where the 6% live is where most of the minority nationalities in China live. And that's the proper term from the socialist tradition, minority nationalities, and there's 55 of them in China. So that's a crucial factor. Can we go to the next slide? Now, there's another factor that plays a role that runs across that. I've got the Hu line in red on this particular map, but I've also got a blue line that runs through, and the red area there is Gansu province. That's known as the Hexi line, literally west of the river, west of the Yellow River. And it's a vital corridor that runs between two very high plateaus, Qinghai in the south and Inner Mongolia to the north. It runs for 1,200 kilometers and connects obviously the eastern parts, the populated parts, with the northwestern part. And then you can see where the blue line goes. Then there was a northern route and a southern route, both of them in Xinjiang Autonomous Region. Now, this was an area highly contested for thousands of years. The Han dynasty controlled it for a while, 2,000 years ago. lost control. The Tang dynasty was able to control it again and control the western areas. But it was only in the mid-1700s that the Qing dynasty was finally able to incorporate Xinjiang area into China proper, almost 300 years ago. Now, it shouldn't be a surprise to you that this particular corridor, the Hexi Corridor, was the core of the ancient Silk Road. And you have many, many sites along there that have extraordinary historical evidence of the ancient Silk Road, but also it's extraordinarily important corridor for the modern Silk Road, the Belt and Road Initiative, and thousands, I'll talk about it later, thousands and thousands of trains, for example, run along that corridor before crossing the Eurasian landmass. So you can see how important economically and strategically Xinjiang is. Next slide, thanks. Right, this is just a very quick slide from the Top China Travel. You can now travel, of course, along the Hexi Corridor and follow the route of the ancient Silk Road. But you can also see with the two rivers, the blue line in the north is the Yellow River and the one in the south is the Yangtze, why it's called west of the river. I'll just very, very briefly show two more slides. They'll be relevant later. So first one, please. Now, this is the economic growth in Xinjiang since 2010 of the last 20 years. It's averaged about 10% per year. It'll be relevant later. And the last one, please. And this is the population growth in Xinjiang since 2010. Okay, I'm going to move on now. I'm actually going old school. I'm going to read a printed text, so we can remove these slides now, thanks. I'd like to begin with a quotation and a story for this part. The quotation: China continues to protect and promote the rights of all minorities in the Xinjiang Autonomous Region. And now for the story. Not long after the Kunming railway station massacre in March of 2014, I was teaching a class in Beijing. Now, the massacre was perpetrated by about a dozen Uyghur terrorists who killed 31 people with knives and injured 140 others. And it was just one of thousands of such incidents over that 20-year period. In my class was a young Uyghur student. She and her sister are both from Xinjiang, and they were studying in Beijing at the time. And during a presentation to the class, she gave an impassioned speech. Islam is a religion of peace and not violence, she said. I'm a Uyghur, and I'm proud to be Chinese. In fact, the vast majority of Uyghur people see themselves as part of China and condemn the terrorists, she went on to say. Now, I've begun with the quotation and the story since they raise two very important points concerning Marxist analysis of the problems in Xinjiang and how to solve them. And that is to say, Marxist analysis by Chinese specialists. Now, these 2 points concern the preferential policies for minority nationalities in socialist countries and a Marxist approach to human rights. Now, as for minority nationalities, the Uyghur student said that the vast majority of Uyghur people see themselves as part of China, as Chinese. Why did she make this point? I'll just skip. A major feature of all socialist countries since the earliest days of the Soviet Union has been preferential policies for minorities. These include high levels of autonomy and governance, economic assistance support, fostering of languages, education, culture, and so on. And in China, this has also meant exempting minorities from the recently abolished one-child policy. And so, for example, and referred that graph earlier, revealed this, in the last 40 years, the Uyghur population in Xinjiang has doubled. Now, we need to be careful here and avoid seeing this situation from a Western colonialist perspective. These preferential policies are not simply promoted by a government for minorities who are outside the structures of power. Instead, the policies arise from the fact that minorities are very much embodied in the structures of governance. In China, all minorities are represented in the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conferences and can be elected to the 5 levels of People's Congresses. So the student in my class was alluding to her personal experience of these preferential policies. At the time, she came from a relatively poor region of China. Parts of Xinjiang were then still mired in absolute poverty, and the preferential policies had given her and her sister an opportunity to study in Beijing. At the same time, these policies have also produced some profound contradictions. Now, there's many aspects of these contradictions, and I can't go into them all, but one is crucial. As you saw from the maps earlier, many of the minority nationalities in China live in remote border regions to the west of, or the northwest of, the Huanyong Line. And as a result, many of them have lagged behind in China's rapid economic development. You know, hundreds of millions of lives have been improved in the southwest of the line, but northeast of the line, in the sparsely populated border regions, poverty was still a problem more than a decade ago. Now, this is despite all the efforts at economic assistance of these parts, including Xinjiang. They remain quite unsatisfactory. And this is where the quotation now becomes important that I quoted earlier. China continues to protect and promote the rights of all minorities in the Xinjiang Autonomous Region. Yes, there are many minorities in Xinjiang, 13 originally, 47 in total. But rights, human rights, for those of us who have been brought up in the few Western countries of the world, all of them former colonizers, human rights automatically brings to mind freedom of expression, movement and assembly. I don't want to spend any time with this very thin notion, except to note that it's based on the right to private property, as Marx and Engels already identified. But there is another tradition of human rights as part of the Marxist approach and is promoted vigorously in China. Now, the roots are anti-colonial and anti-hegemonic sovereignty, shared by all colonized countries, but the core human right is the right to subsistence, to socioeconomic well-being, to common prosperity. Now, there's key moments in the development of this approach. Engels, 1843, the purpose of socialism is to guarantee the subsistence of the proletariat. Stalin in 1936, that the foundation of all rights is freedom from exploitation. Everything else is meaningless if a person is haunted by the fear of being tomorrow deprived of work, of home, and of bread. Instead, socialism seeks a prosperous and cultured life for all. Or we can note the slogan from the Jiangxi Fujian Soviet in the late 20s and early 30s, make sure that people have a roof over their heads, food, clothes, and warmth in winter, and they'll become communists. Deng Xiaoping's point that poor socialism is not socialism at all. And today, it's the policy of common prosperity. Now, if you'd like to know more, you need to look in other areas. There's plenty of information about this now. Perhaps the best place is the website of the China Society for Human Rights Studies, chinahumanrights.org, and there's a rapidly increasing amount of material, accurate, factual material about the situation in China in many, many places. One example, there's an army of vloggers from England and the United States who, young people who now live in China and have taken up vlogging with hundreds of thousands of followers, showing what life in China is actually like, rather than all of the, complete web of lies and misrepresentations that you find in Anglo media especially. But anyway, what's all this stuff about Marxist approach to human rights got to do with Xinjiang? Ever since Xinjiang's been part of China in the mid-1700s, it's been extremely strategic, but plagued by periodic difficulties. And then in the mid-1990s, these were escalated with the spread of Islamic radicalism among some parts of the population. Weapons, drugs, trained fighters passed across the remote and mountainous borders with neighbouring countries. And from the mid-1990s till about 5 years ago, there were thousands of terrorist incidents, mostly targeted at other Uyghur people. The response? To begin with, the immediate question was safety, stability, and social harmony. A new governor was appointed with a reputation for getting things done. And as a result, for the last 5 years or so, there have been no terrorist incidents. But how is this Marxist achieving social stability is simply a prerequisite for economic development. The analysis by many scholars and policymakers was that the root cause of the unrest and difficulties in Xinjiang was endemic poverty, especially outside the cities. With limited job opportunities, young people especially would be attracted to extremist views and engage in separatist and terrorist activities. And as a result of these conclusions, many angles were developed, and these require long-term devoted work to improve the socioeconomic conditions. Quality of education was improved so as to enable young people to find jobs. And this, of course, includes ideological education in Marxism, and especially among the Uyghur, also in religion, believe it or not. Some of the main teachers are, in fact, imams. There were job opportunities increased for young men and women, and incomes have been rising at around 10 to 15% per year. Further, young CPC members volunteered to work in poor villages, so to develop targeted programs in light of concrete conditions, so people could be lifted out of poverty. And in Xinjiang, where some of the most intractable poverty in China was to be found, was finally declared free of poverty in late 2020. And you should note that the Chinese definition of poverty is more comprehensive than that of the World Bank. Now, the most significant project here is the Belt and Road Initiative, launched in neighbouring Kazakhstan in 2013. Now, I think we know that the BRI has many dimensions, but Xinjiang, as those maps should have showed, is a linchpin. Nearly all of the long-distance freight trains running across the Eurasian landmass, and there are thousands of these trains now, run through Xinjiang. As a hub of the new Silk Road, Xinjiang's economy has been booming. Now, while the figures for 2020 are a bit lower due to the pandemic, for the last actually 10 years, I've got 5 years here, but 10 years, the economy in Xinjiang has grown at a rate of about 10% per year. And just before the pandemic hit, as a sign of this in 2019, more than 100 million visitors from other parts of China and internationally went to Xinjiang. So a question remains in light of all of this: why have the Western imperialist powers, I've got declining and fragmenting here, but given up on the Dalai Lama and made Xinjiang the flavour of the month, deploying the old anti-communist playbook of atrocity propaganda? By now, the answer should be obvious. Xinjiang is at last realising the core Marxist human right to socioeconomic well-being or common prosperity. And for Western imperialists, this is intolerable. As a footnote, in 2016, Sinopec, the huge state-owned enterprise, announced the discovery of massive oil and gas fields in the Tarim Basin in Xinjiang, with more discovered in 2020. This is one of the largest reserves of oil and gas in Asia. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Roland. Very interesting talk and addressing the issue of Xinjiang. It is so important because there has been the excuse on the issue of human rights, but this dispels the issue of the attacks of genocide. So your graph that presents the growth of the population in that area with the Uyghurs, it is important because the only information we receive here is what the propaganda machine wants us